The woods smelled wrong. Dunk noticed it first as thunder plodded along the rutted road toward Ashford, 3 days out and counting. Not wrong like rot or disease, wrong like the air itself had been scorched and then hidden beneath rain and green growing things. He'd been a hedge knight squire, long enough to know the smell of a campfire doused in haste, but this was sharper, hotter, like standing downwind of a smithy that worked metal until it screamed.
Sir?
Egg's voice cut through his thoughts. The boy rode beside him on their sway-backed mare, all elbows and shaved head and questions.
You've gone quiet.
I was just thinking
About the tourney?
about keeping us fed until we reach it.
Dunk studied the tree line, where morning fog clung to the low places like it was afraid to leave.
And I'm just wondering about why every bird in these woods shut up the moment we came around that bend.
Egg twisted in his saddle, listening. The silence pressed down like a held breath.
Maybe a wolf?
Wolves don't burn the undergrowth.
The boy's eyes went wide.
Where?
Dunk pointed to a patch of blackened ferns 20 yards off the road, the kind of damage that should have been obvious, but somehow wasn't unless you knew to look. The scorch marks formed a rough circle, edges crisp as parchment, held too close to a candle. Around it, the leaves were the wrong color. Not autumn brown, but heat-sick yellow.
Could be travelers.
Egg offered, but his voice had gone small.
Could be.
Dunk didn't believe it. Travelers didn't leave melted iron in the dirt. He'd found the first piece 100 yards back, a twisted lump of metal that might have been a buckle or chain link, warped like candle wax, and still faintly warm to the touch. He'd dropped it fast and wiped his fingers on his tunic. Now he saw another, half buried in leaf mold, and beside it something that made his stomach clench. A track, not a hoof print or a boot, something with claws that dug deep, each talon the length of his thumb, spaced wrong for any beast he'd ever hunted, and at the edges of the impression, the dirt had baked hard as pottery.
Egg, get behind me.
What is it?
I don't know. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe.
The sound hit them like a fist, a low, rattling exhale that seemed to come from the earth itself, followed by a wet, pained hiss. Thunder snorted and danced sideways, nearly throwing Dunk from the saddle. The mare bolted outright, and Egg yelped as he clung to her neck.
Easy, Thunder.
Dunk hauled on the reins, fighting Thunder to a shivering standstill.
Egg, are you hurt?
No, but Sir Duncan, look.
The boy was pointing into the thicket, where the shadows were too dark for midday, and the air shimmered like summer heat over stone. Something moved in there, something large and low to the ground, and as Dunk's eyes adjusted, he saw the shape of it, a mass of black scales that caught the light like wet coal, the curve of a serpentine neck, the folded ruin of a wing.
God preserve us,
he whispered. The dragon's eye opened. It was the size of Dunk's fist, molten amber ringed in black, and it fixed on them with an intelligence that stopped his breath. Not the dull stare of a beast in pain, but the focused, measuring gaze of something that understood exactly what they were and what they could do. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then, Egg slid from the mare's back and took a step forward.
Boy, don't you dare.
It's hurt.
Egg's voice shook, but held.
Look at its wing and its leg. There's rope marks.
Dunk saw them now. Old scars circling one hind limb and the joint where wing met body, the kind you got from chains yanked hard and worn long. The dragon's breathing was shallow and rapid, each exhale pushing a faint wisp of smoke into the cool air. Its left wing hung at an angle that made Dunk's shoulder ache in sympathy.
We walk away,
he said hoarsely.
We walk away and we tell no one, because if lords hear there's a dragon in these woods, they'll come with spears and songs and they'll leave us dead in a ditch for knowing. You understand me?
Egg didn't move.
And if we leave it here, what then?
Then it dies, or it doesn't, and either way it's none of our concern.
Sir Arlen wouldn't have walked away.
The words hit harder than any blow. Dunk felt his throat tighten, felt the weight of the shield on Thunder's flank, the shield he'd taken from a dead man who'd been kinder to him than the world had any right to expect.
Sir Arlen was a better man than me, and he died anyway.
But you're not walking away.
Egg's eyes were bright and certain.
I know you're not.
Dunk stared at the dragon, at the labored rise and fall of its ribs, at the way it held itself perfectly still, like prey that had learned hunters followed movement. He thought about the old knight who'd found him in Flea Bottom and given him a name and a purpose. He thought about walking away and living with it.
Damn you, boy, damn you and your knowing.
He dismounted, legs unsteady, and approached the thicket with his hands spread and empty. The The dragon's eye tracked him, pupil contracting to a slit. Up close, it was smaller than he'd first thought. Maybe 50 feet from nose to tail, with a wingspan that might have reached 80 feet if the left side wasn't shredded membrane and broken bone. Young, then, barely more than a hatchling by the measures of the old songs.
Easy.
Dunk breathed.
Easy now. We're not here to hurt you.
The dragon's jaw cracked open, revealing teeth like daggers and a throat that glowed faint orange. A warning, a promise.
Sir Duncan!
Egg crept up beside him, moving with a strange calm that reminded Dunk uncomfortably of how princes must walk through crowds, like they owned the very air.
Let me try.
If it burns you.
It won't.
The boy said it like prophecy. Egg knelt in the dirt, small and skinny and utterly fearless, and stretched out one pale hand.
They said you were all gone.
He whispered.
They said the world moved on and the age of dragons died with the last of you. But you're here, you're alive. And if you're alive, then the stories are wrong. And if the stories are wrong, then the realm is smaller than I thought.
The dragon's head lowered, inch by careful inch, until its snout was level with Egg's outstretched fingers. Dunk held his breath. The world narrowed to that moment. Boy and beast, both too stubborn to look away. Then Egg's hand touched warm scales, and the dragon closed its eyes. They named it Night Wander for the way it moved. Only after sunset, only in shadow, gliding low over the treetops like a piece of the dark itself come loose. For 3 days, they hid it in a ravine, half a mile from the road, close enough to reach, but far enough that the smell of sulfur and old smoke wouldn't drift into passing camps.
We're mad.
Dunk said on the second night, watching Egg coax the dragon into eating a stolen chicken.
Completely mad.
Probably.
Egg grinned, face lit by the faint glow leaking from Night Wander's throat.
But look how strong it's getting. The wing's already healing.
It was true. The torn membrane had begun to knit itself together with a speed that seemed impossible, and the dragon's breathing had gone from shallow gasps to deep, steady pulls. It still limped on the scarred leg, but each day it moved with more confidence, more weight. And each day, Egg spent longer in the ravine, speaking softly in a language Dunk didn't recognize, old words that seemed to curl in the air like smoke.
Where'd you learn that?
Dunk asked once.
Books.
Egg didn't look up from where he was cleaning the dragon's injured talon with boiled water and clean cloth.
Old books. The kind maesters don't like students reading.
You're not a Meister's student.
No,
The boy smiled thinly.
I'm not.
Dunk let it drop. Every squire had secrets, but watching Egg with Night Wander was like watching something inevitable slot into place, like a key finding its lock. The dragon waited for Egg's voice before it ate. When Dunk approached, it watched him with wary tolerance. Not trust, exactly, but acceptance. On the third night, Dunk fashioned a brace for the wing from leather strips and green wood. Not enough to heal it, but enough to keep it from tearing worse. Night Wander tolerated the work with twitching patience, smoke leaking from its nostrils whenever Dunk pulled the bindings tight.
Sorry,
He muttered.
I know it hurts.
The dragon rumbled deep in its chest. Not quite a growl, not quite a purr.
It knows you're helping.
Egg said softly.
It knows.
That night, as they walked back to their camp through darkness, so complete Dunk could barely see his own feet, Egg spoke the thing they'd both been avoiding.
We can't keep this secret much longer.
We have to, at least until after the tourney.
And then what? We just leave it here, hope nobody finds it.
Dunk stopped walking. In the distance, he could see the glow of Ashford's tourney grounds, hundreds of cook fires and pavilions stretching across the meadow like a city made of silk. Lords and knights from all over the reach gathered to test their courage and skill. Any one of them would kill for the glory of slaying a dragon, even a wounded one.
I don't know,
He admitted.
but if word gets out now, we're dead. You understand that? Not just us. Night Wander too. They'll hunt it down and mount its head on a wall and sing songs about the brave men who did it.
I won't let them.
Egg's voice had gone hard. All boyish lightness burned away.
I won't.
You can't stop them, Egg. You're just...
Just what?
The boy turned to face him, and in the darkness, his eyes seemed to glow like embers.
Just a squire? Just a small folk boy who doesn't matter?
Dunk felt something cold slide down his spine.
That's not what I meant.
Then say what you mean, Sir Duncan.
They stood there in the dark, and Dunk understood with sudden terrible clarity that he didn't know this boy at all. Didn't know where he'd learned high Valyrian or how he walked like nobility. or why a dragon had chosen him.
We keep it quiet. We do what we came here to do. We survive, and after, we'll figure something out.
Egg nodded slowly.
After.
But Dunk heard the lie in both their voices. The tourney was everything the songs promised, and nothing Dunk had imagined. The pavilions stretched across Ashford Meadow in a riot of color. Red and white and gold, green and black and purple, each house banner snapping in the autumn wind like a challenge. The smell of roasted meat and mulled wine mixed with horse sweat and oiled leather, and everywhere Dunk looked, he saw knights who moved like they owned the world. He'd paid his entry with the last of their coin and half a lie about his lineage. Now he wore Sir Arlan's old armor, dented and patched, but serviceable, and tried not to think about what would happen if he actually had to fight.
You'll do fine, sir.
Egg said, adjusting the straps on Dunk's pauldron.
Just remember what Sir Arlan taught you.
Sir Arlan taught me to stay alive, not to win tourneys.
Same thing, isn't it?
Dunk snorted. Around them, the crowd roared as two knights shattered lances on each other's shields. He watched a Tyrrell bannerman unseat a Hightower cousin, watched gold change hands and women wave silk favors, watched the whole beautiful, brutal machinery of Westerosi nobility grind on.
Sir Duncan of Pennytree!
The herald's voice cut across the field.
You're called to the lists!
His stomach dropped.
That's me.
You'll be grand.
Egg shoved his helm into his hands.
Just don't die. Dying would be bad for me. And you, I suppose.
Dunk managed a weak laugh, then walked toward Thunder and the waiting lance. His opponent was a Fossaway knight, apple not peach, someone muttered, and he sat his courser like he'd been born in the saddle. Dunk had maybe a dozen tilts under his belt, half of them practice, and every one of his scars was screaming that this was a terrible idea. But he'd paid the entry. He'd given his word. And hedge knights didn't have the luxury of backing down. The first pass shook his teeth loose and nearly threw him from the saddle. The second shattered both lances and left his shoulder numb. The third ended with Dunk on his back in the dirt, staring up at clouds while the crowd cheered and someone led Thunder away.
Sir Duncan!
Egg's face appeared above him, upside down and worried.
Can you hear me?
Unfortunately.
Dunk groaned and let the boy haul him upright. Nothing broken, which was more luck than skill.
I'm done for the day.
You did well.
I lost.
You stayed on for 3 passes against a proper knight. That's something.
Dunk brushed mud from his surcoat and tried to feel something other than embarrassed. The tourney went on without him. It didn't notice one hedge knight's failure any more than the ocean noticed a dropped stone. That night, they slipped away from the pavilions and made for the ravine. Nightwander greeted them with a rumble that Dunk was starting to recognize as pleasure, its tail sweeping back and forth like a hound's. The wing brace had held, and the dragon was moving with something approaching grace.
Soon.
Egg murmured, running his hand along the creature's flank.
Soon you'll fly again.
Dunk started to reply, but froze. In the distance, back toward the tourney grounds, someone was shouting. Not celebration, alarm.
What's that about?
Egg whispered.
Don't know. Stay here. Keep Nightwander quiet.
He crept to the edge of the ravine and looked back toward the meadow. Torches were moving in an organized pattern, spreading out from the pavilions like ripples from a thrown stone. A search, but for what? Then he heard the voice, high and carrying and drunk with cruelty.
Puppeteer bitch needs to learn her place. String her up, I say. Let her dance on a rope like her little dolls.
Arian Brightflame. Dunk knew that voice from a dozen campfire stories. The king's son, beautiful as dawn and mad as fire. And if Arian was calling for blood, someone was about to die. He ran back to Egg.
We have to go now, or...
What? Why?
Because Prince Arian's drunk and angry and looking to hurt someone, and I'd bet my sword hand it's got something to do with that puppeteer we saw this morning, the one with the dragon puppet.
Egg's face went pale.
Tansel, too tall.
You know her?
She was kind to me, gave me an apple.
The boy's jaw set.
We can't let him hurt her.
Egg, we're nobody. If we get between a prince and his sport, they'll kill us.
Then they'll kill us.
Egg's eyes blazed.
But I won't stand by and watch, and neither will you.
Dunk wanted to argue, wanted to grab the boy and ride hard for anywhere else, but he thought of Sir Arlan, who taught him that a knight's worth wasn't in his birth, but his choices.
Damn it all to 7 hells.
They reached the pavilions in time to see Arian Targaryen, silver-haired and beautiful and utterly terrible, strike Tansel across the face, hard enough to split her lip.
Careful, princeling.
Dunk heard himself say.
You'll hurt your little hand on her teeth.
The silence that followed was so complete he could hear his own heartbeat. Every eye turned to him, the drunk prince, the frightened woman, the dozen knights and lords who'd gathered to watch the show. Arian's smile was a razor.
And who are you to speak to me, hedge knight?
I am Sir Duncan the Tall,
His voice didn't shake, small miracle.
and I'm the man telling you to leave her be.
Or what?
Or I'll make you.
Someone laughed. Someone else gasped. Arian's smile widened into something that might have been delight.
You're challenging me? A prince of the blood?
Too late to take it back now. Dunk straightened his shoulders and met those mad purple eyes.
I'm challenging any man who beats women for sport, prince or no.
Then you'll die for your chivalry.
Arian's voice went silk-soft.
I claim trial by combat, 7 against 7, as is my right. And when your champions bleed out in the dirt, hedge knight, I'll make sure you watch before I take your head.
The crowd erupted. Dunk stood frozen, dimly aware that Egg was pulling at his arm, that Tansel was crying, that he'd just signed his own death warrant. Trial of 7. He needed 6 champions willing to die for a hedge knight they didn't know. He'd be lucky to find one.
You're an idiot.
Egg said flatly. They sat in their pavilion, really just a lean-to made of stolen canvas, while the tourney grounds buzzed with news of the trial. Dunk had spent the last hour begging knights for help and being turned away with everything from polite refusal to outright laughter.
I know.
A complete and utter fool.
I know.
Sir Arlen would have...
Egg's voice cracked.
He would have done the same thing.
Dunk looked at the boy, saw tears tracking through the dirt on his face, and felt something break loose in his chest.
I'm sorry, Egg. I didn't think. I couldn't watch him hurt her.
I know.
Egg scrubbed at his eyes.
That's why you're a knight, and he's just a monster with a crown. But now we're going to die, and Night Wonder will be alone, and everything will have been for nothing.
Maybe not.
A voice from the darkness, cultured and warm. A man stepped into their firelight. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a 3-headed dragon sewn on his chest. Dark hair touched with silver at the temples, a kind face marked by old scars.
Perhaps I can help.
Dunk shot to his feet.
My lord, Prince.
Baelor.
The man smiled.
Prince Baelor Targaryen, called Breakspear, and you must be the hedge knight brave enough, or foolish enough, to strike my nephew.
Egg had gone perfectly still, face unreadable.
I didn't strike him, my lord. I only spoke.
Words can cut deeper than swords, Sir Duncan, especially to one as vain as Arian.
Baelor's eyes shifted to Egg, and something flickered in his expression. Recognition, curiosity.
And this must be your remarkably well-spoken squire.
Egg, my lord.
Egg.
Baelor repeated the name thoughtfully.
How fitting.
A long silence stretched between them. Dunk felt like he was missing something important. Some undercurrent he couldn't quite grasp.
You said you might help, my lord.
Dunk ventured.
I did, and I will.
Baelor's attention returned to him.
Because Arian shames our house with every breath he takes. Because that woman's only crime was making wooden dragons dance. And because...
His gaze flicked back to Egg.
I suspect there are secrets here worth protecting.
Dunk's hand went to his sword.
Meaning?
Meaning I'll stand with you in the trial, Sir Duncan. I'll bring my sword and my name, and I'll gather others who believe justice matters more than blood.
Baelor's voice hardened.
Arian expects you to stand alone. We'll prove him wrong.
Why would you risk this? You're the king's son, the heir.
Which means I have the luxury of doing what's right without fear.
Baelor smiled sadly.
And the burden of knowing what happens when good men do nothing. I won't fail that test. Not today.
Over the next day, Baelor made good on his word. One by one, champions appeared. Robin Riesling, thin and fierce, with a singer's hands and a warrior's heart. Humphrey Harding, scarred and steady. Humphrey Beesbury, who owed Baelor a debt. Raymond Fossaway, who painted his shield green to stand against his red apple cousin. And finally, Lionel Baratheon himself, the laughing storm in his youth, who arrived grinning like this was the grandest adventure.
7.
Dunk breathed, staring at the men who'd pledged to bleed for him.
We actually have 7.
We do.
Baelor gripped his shoulder.
Now all we have to do is survive.
But that night, as Dunk checked his armor one last time, Egg pulled him aside.
Sir Duncan, We have to talk about Nightwander.
What about?
It's getting stronger, and it knows something's wrong. It feels it through me.
Egg's hand pressed against his chest.
If I'm in danger tomorrow, really in danger, it's going to come, and there's nothing I can do to stop it.
Dunk felt ice slide through his guts.
How do you know?
Because I can feel it too, like a rope between us, pulling tighter every hour. If I die,
Egg's voice went small.
it'll burn the world looking for who killed me.
Then we don't die.
Easier said than done, sir.
They stood in the darkness, and Dunk thought about dragons and princes and secrets that could shatter kingdoms. He thought about walking away, all those days ago, leaving Nightwander to die alone in the woods. He was glad they hadn't.
Whatever happens tomorrow,
He said quietly.
you stay behind me. You understand? I don't care if the whole Kingsguard comes screaming. You stay safe.
Egg nodded, throat working.
And if Nightwander comes anyway,
Then we deal with it.
Dunk managed a grin he didn't feel.
Wouldn't be the strangest thing to happen this week.
The boy laughed, high and shaky, and for a moment, he was just a child again. Dawn broke blood red over Ashford Meadow. The trial of 7 would begin within the hour. 7 champions stood ready to defend a hedge knight's honor. 7 princes and lords prepared to crush him. But in a ravine half a mile distant, something ancient stirred. Something that had tasted freedom and found a bond worth dying for. Something that could feel its chosen boy's fear like a second heartbeat, growing faster with every passing moment. Nightwander's eyes opened, molten gold burning in the darkness, and the last dragon in Westeros spread its healing wings.